Eurovan was in for a check for overheating, or check for overheating. We found a few things. First of all, the coolant was all rusty looking. I'll show you in a second how dirty it looked. So just for a point of reference, because I'm going to do some whiteboard of knowledge explaining here. Coolant reservoir, heater core is up here, obviously radiator. So we'll continue in a second. This is the initial drain that came out. You can see how rusty looking it is, and it's got that weird smell, acidic smell as well. Some of the clean stuff that came out after flushing it 3-4 times. And this is some of the original stuff still, nice and rusty. So anyways, here goes with the whiteboard of knowledge. Let's start with the engine here. And the radiator here, heater core here, and the reservoir here. So upper and lower radiator hoses. The heater core, you got an in and you got an out. And then the reservoir is connected to the head as well as the radiator. Okay. And on the Eurovan, there's a special bleed on the cylinder head that goes to the reservoir, and it tees in. If you're familiar with this reservoir bottle, there's a tee so that any air, let's say you drain the system, any air in the system will go to this bleed hose into the reservoir and then bleed out the air. So anyways, the problem was the customer came in complaining about overheating, so we looked at the cooling system. Sure enough, it's running hot. Determined that the cooling system needed a thermostat because the lower radiator hose was cold. So we started with the thermostat. You can see how rusty it is, and it was basically not opening up. So while the thermostat was out, we took advantage of it and flushed the system. As you saw, the dirty coolant. We used some chemical flush in case you guys want to know what it was. We've had pretty good success with this clean flow. 10-minute rad flush. You'll never get it completely clean, but it's definitely cleaner than it was. So anyways, we got that all cleaned up, and while we were at it, after replacing the thermostat, we figured we'd put in a fan switch as well, just to cover our bases. Rad fan switch is located in the radiator. Once the coolant circulates, that sensor gets hot and it triggers the fans. Well, with the new coolant, new thermostat, it was still running hot, or the fans weren't coming on by 3/4 in terms of the needle movement. It was too hot. Shut it off, and well, actually, I manually bridged the rad fan switch. Even though this was a new one, I bridged the fan switch, and while the engine was running, and the needle started to come down. So that told me that I was getting good airflow through the radiator. The radiator was doing its job by cooling the coolant, and the thermostat was obviously open because the cold coolant then entered the engine, and the temperature came down. Thinking that we had a faulty switch, I put in another one. These are brand new switches, as you can see, nice and shiny. Same thing was happening. It gets to 3/4. The needle should hover in the middle. If you're familiar with the Vanagon or Eurovan needles, or pretty much any Volkswagen, in the middle of travel is usually where the needle should be, regardless of how hot the car gets or ambient temperatures. You want to see the needle hovering here a little bit on a really hot day, a little bit above the middle. It should be no problem. But anyway, so it was getting again to 3/4 with the second new switch. So this is where you can go crazy and get sidetracked. So don't forget don't second guess yourself. If you know how the system works and you know where the problem is, if I bridge the harness plug at the rad fan switch, the needle comes down. So there has to be a problem with this, not the electrical circuit, because it's the fan switch that's controlling the radiator fan. So by me bridging it manually, I'm just pretending I'm doing the work of this switch. So the fact that the needle comes down when I bridge the harness plug, taking the new switches out of the equation, tells me that these switches are not good. They're not activating at the correct time. So I ended up putting back the old one, which is over 20 years old, and sure enough, the needle's right where in the middle. The fan comes on right in the middle. So yeah, don't overlook new parts being bad. If you install a new part and things are not better, it could still be the problem with the new part. And don't move on to something else. If the logic dictates that there should be a problem, that there is a problem with the new part, stick with it. Don't look for anything else. Getting back to the bleeding, the head here, there's a little orifice that's plugged up. I cannot get to it with the with everything installed, intake manifold and the intake runner, etc. So I was not able to clean out this hose, so this hose doesn't bleed anything out back into the reservoir in terms of air. So the whole system is relying on the little radiator bleed to bleed the air out. That can work, but you can have an instance where air gets trapped for too long in the engine or in the heater core and it just won't bleed out, and then you can take a chance of overheating things. Not so much the needle overheating, but internally an air pocket that's causing a hot spot, and so you can warp stuff. So if you don't have flow out of this hose, there's a T-piece you can disconnect. You can check flow here, and that's basically what I did. I disconnected this T-piece. I blew into the radiator hose, into the bleed for the radiator, and I was able to get air to come out in the reservoir. Air got pushed in, and I saw a level change in the reservoir. I tried to do that with the bleed that's for the cylinder head. I couldn't blow through it. That told me that there's a restriction here. So, and the way to get around it, obviously, in my case, I just used my vacuum filler, because the vacuum filler doesn't care where the air is. Once you put the system under vacuum at the reservoir, any air that's atmospheric pressure, once you put vacuum in the reservoir, it'll push itself into the reservoir. Even if the engine here is full of coolant, or if air is partially sitting in the radiator, once you put the system under vacuum, because this is air that's under 15 psi, it'll work its way into the reservoir with no problem. And then once the system is under vacuum, that's when the coolant will go in to fill up those areas that had no coolant. So yeah, sorry about the rambling, sorry about the lack of quality artwork here. Hopefully some of this made sense. If you have questions, feel free to post in the comments. I might redo this video in the future with better diagrams, but I just thought I'd point out that you don't always just trust new parts. What I mean is, don't ignore a new part, saying that, oh, it can't be this because it's new. Eliminate everything else first, I guess. But if everything is pointing towards a new part being faulty, don't hesitate exchanging it. I did it twice, still the same result. Put in the old one, no more problem. So we're getting these guys replaced or refunded, returning them under warranty. And these are obviously knockoff aftermarket ones. So there you go. Tool part quality. You get what you pay for. I don't know what the boss paid for, but anyways, thanks for watching. After draining this thing into the recycling bin, look at the rust that's in behind, or left behind. That's crazy. So we're going to tell the guy to drive it for a few weeks, maybe a month, and then we'll do another flush.